Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Tonight, I wanted to talk to you about the unstoppable continuation of the armed opposition in Syria and what are the secrets exactly behind this progress that is coming from the armed opposition in Syria. Today, they reached Hama, a very important and strategic city in Syria, and they are on their way soon to control Homs. Homs, if they capture it, you would be talking about the biggest province inside of Syria. The Syrian forces that belong to Bashar al-Assad are retreating, and they are confirming that they are losing these territories. Many things that are happening, and tonight we're going to be covering as much as possible when it comes to statements coming from these armed groups. What's happening? Why are they progressing so quickly? And what are the reasons that they are not being supported sufficiently, at least when it comes to their traditional allies? And is there a hidden deal that we do not know about between Russia, Iran, Lebanon, Turkey, alongside a couple of other countries, including statements that are coming from Israel that they are indeed now worried from what's happening inside of Syria? But firstly, I wanted to begin with Gaza. The Palestinian resistance, they released Al-Qassam brigades, their third ambush in the Gaza locations where they are targeting Israelis, and they are introducing new weapons now. In one of their recent releases, they are showing new RPGs that they're using, Russian-made or Soviet-made to be more accurate, that are reaching Gaza. And every day we're seeing more progress when it comes to the Palestinian resistance inside of Gaza, including in Jabalia, the area that received one of the most atrocious and horrific campaigns of ethnic cleansing and starvation, and still is. The situation in North Gaza is considered to be disastrous. It's a disaster zone. Yet the Palestinian resistance is prevailing on the ground and not allowing Israel to continue and control at least fully this full territory. This is happening simultaneously with talks and reports that Hamas now and the Palestinian movements had certain progress now when it comes to the day after the war inside of Gaza. And there have been reports coming from Egypt that Hamas and the resistance movements that they represent in the negotiations have now accepted the actual proposal coming from Egypt that would begin with a ceasefire and gradual Israeli withdrawal, in addition to a prisoner exchange, alongside the other details that the Palestinian side wanted when it comes to Gaza. However, things are not very clear. What's clear is that there is more pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu is facing a lot of pressure internally, judicial, public, political, even from the army. He is becoming more and more paranoid by the day. We're having propaganda videos being published inside of Israel on Benjamin Netanyahu. The other day, Channel 12 released a video of his son as if he was a captive or a prisoner of war inside of Gaza. At the end of the video, they said, it's an AI-generated video, said, if it was indeed Netanyahu's son there, all of our people would have been alive. Because Benjamin Netanyahu is not caring about any of these lives of the people, Israeli prisoners of war inside of Gaza. So there are talks about progress. However, we are not seeing anything implemented on the ground yet. But so far, the resistance is continuing inside of Gaza. Which leads me to Syria. Syria is the thing that I will be talking about mostly inside in this live stream. There has been this campaign, a campaign called the Deterrence of Aggression. coming from the armed resistance, armed opposition movements in Syria, primarily HTS or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was previously called Jabhat al-Nusra, and Tahrir al-Sham before the liberation of Sham, led by al-Julani. And they started off by all of a sudden controlling Aleppo. Now, when we talk about Aleppo, Aleppo is over 2 million citizens. And they controlled it relatively easily. Now, they reached Hama. Hama is an extremely important area inside of Syria. And they actually faced opposition from the government forces in Hama, but later on, the government forces had to retreat, letting the opposition control an airbase with some fighter jets. Mind you, the fighter jets are nothing significant, really. And actually controlling Hama. Now, in effect, the opposition has the majority of the Syrian population under their control, and they are declaring that they are on their way to liberate all of Syria. If their next step is indeed successful, which is going to be Homs, they will be controlling the largest province inside of Syria, with over 3 million people living in that location. Now, after that, we would have Damascus. And if we have Damascus, then we're talking about the opposition, in effect, taking down Bashar al-Assad. Taking down Bashar al-Assad. So what I wanted to talk to you about is the actual progress. What are the leaders of the armed opposition inside of Syria are saying? What reports are we hearing about Bashar al-Assad? And what is the role here of his traditional allies? His traditional allies worked really hard for the Syrian government to recapture many of the parts inside of Syria, only for them to now leave him. So what happened? And of course, we know there has been a big opposition to Assad throughout history inside of Syria, up until we started to have intervention from Russia and Iran, who were worried about the US and Israeli intervention, primarily when it comes to the supply line of Hezbollah. And me, I'm like many of you, by the way, although I'm talking and posting, I'm trying to understand what's happening as much as possible. And I'm sharing what I'm trying to understand, or what I am at least temporarily concluding in the way. So I wouldn't like anyone to take what I say as anything conclusive, because we're talking about something developing, something that has traditionally been very divisive. And there has been propaganda that was on both sides, and there have been things that are accurate. And we're trying to make sense out of all of the mess that's happening now, and try and be as accurate as possible and as objective as possible too, especially with the lack of clarity when it comes to certain things. But the more time goes by, the more it appears to be that there are more things that we do not know than the things that are being made public. However, unfortunately, we have to deal with with only what is being made public. It's not like we have any intel, inside information. No, we don't. All we can do is read from both sides, see what's happening, and try and establish the true image of the situation inside Syria. But I wanted to start off with some statements coming from the one of the armed opposition leaders who is leading this campaign inside of Syria. His name is Al-Humsi, if I'm not mistaken. Al-Humsi, who had an interview, and he spoke about the situation on the ground and the advancement and where things are going. This man spoke about the progress of the armed opposition groups, and he described in many cases lack of proper opposition. He was asked about Hezbollah and other forces, saying that they weren't really that present, that the groups that are allied with Iran also haven't been present in the main locations. It appears to be that the majority of the battles have been with the Assad forces. He said that dozens of natives in the cities have been fighting with the armed groups, and they knew strategic locations for the Assad army. The Iranian groups supporting did not have large confrontations with them. He did say that some were killed, some were imprisoned, indicating that there might have been some clashes between them in certain parts, but not in the key areas that they are controlling. I mean, we're talking about Aleppo, that's the first thing. Aleppo, it's as if nothing happened. It's as if nothing happened. Then we had a declaration from the Syrian army that no, they will be protecting Hama, and the observers or people who are supporting the government were saying no, the government will be actually protecting Hama properly. And Hama is very, very important. You're talking about 1 million in terms of population. They had a history with the Assad's father, Bashar al-Assad, Hafez al-Assad, when there was a crackdown on an attempt to take down the government back in the 80s. Okay, what else did he say? He said that the decisions of these armed groups belonging to Iran depend mainly on the IRGC, which means that the IRGC decided not to step in. And I'm going to get to the conclusions, or what we can see as the conclusions, or assumptions, to say the least, because no one can be conclusive, to be honest with you. And what we're trying to do is just shy away from the massive propaganda and try and analyze what's happening. Okay? The Iranian armed groups, according to him, were there to ensure the supply to Lebanon and protect areas in Damascus and other parts too. He was reassuring the minorities, saying that the Assad government is trying to instill fear in people. We respect all sects and religions and protect them, and you won't see anything but mercy from us. And that's something that has been reiterated by Al-Julani himself, who's actually leading this campaign, saying that we are your brothers, and the enemy is the Assad regime, asking people not to leave their locations. And there have been videos of them in areas where people haven't really left. Then they stayed there, and some people even celebrated. And there were videos coming from people on the ground. It's not like videos only published by the side or the media that is belonging to the opposition directly. I'm talking about individuals inside of Syria. We have social media nowadays. So he's saying that, okay? He's saying all of that. And what are the reasons? We have the 66 Air Defense Brigade falling, Hama falling. The government tried to deny first, but then that didn't happen. That's a massive way down the M5 route. Again, you're talking about a rapid expansion without a lot of confrontation. The confrontation primarily happened in Hama. Aleppo was taken like as if it was nothing. The popular mobilization forces in Iraq, who were very well known to be a massive supporter of al-Assad, all of a sudden, some of their leaders saying we can't mobilize to Syria unless we have an authorization from the government, because otherwise we would be considered as, breaching the law, and we might face problems. The Iraqi government is saying that we don't want to participate in what's happening in Syria. We have major, and in particular, I'm going to speak about it because some people, use the sectarian tone. Many in the Shia of Iraq are saying, no, the situation in Syria belongs to the Syrian people. And we don't need to deal with what's happening. Okay, we shouldn't intervene in what happens for the Syrian people. Okay. Well, what's happening with the main parties that were involved to protect al-Assad's government? Again, in many cases, not for massive love for him, some of them, interests. Everything revolves around interests. Why are they not yet supporting the forces of the Syrian government in the face of this expansion? They're seeing the routes, they have intel, they can carry out airstrikes, they can send people to fight. It's not that they can't, but they're choosing not to. Has there been a situation before where these armed opposition groups, because we're talking about many of them, were at risk of hindering from an Iranian-Lebanese perspective the supply of arms to Lebanon, and therefore Iran and Hezbollah had to participate to try and prevent that from happening in a limited manner in certain locations? That's number one. Number two, is Russia understanding that it's inevitable for Assad to fall eventually? And are they reaching some sort of an agreement with Turkey and the armed groups that are operating primarily from support within Turkey that our interests won't be hurt in Syria if these people advanced? That's another thing. And again, in many cases, I'm not trying to, give conclusions, but rather raise questions or certain temporary assumptions based on what we're seeing so far. So please let no one take it as if it's, I'm saying this and that. No, I'm saying what I'm seeing or what I'm understanding and trying to understand, because I'm like you in many cases, trying to understand what's happening. How is all of that related to the change of tone when it comes to the armed opposition, who are reassuring everyone, don't leave, we're going to treat everyone with mercy, Syria belongs to all of the Syrians, the government is trying to instill fear in everyone, we're going to protect everyone, all the minorities and what have you. I mean, so far they controlled Aleppo. We haven't seen any kind of massive crimes or whatever. And mind you, of course, in any conflict, you will have certain things happening. But so far, they are controlling locations. And the population, it's not as if there's anything major. This is going there, controlling these locations. Okay. Is there an understanding? Okay, now you might say, how can there be an understanding? Well, Hezbollah said we support the Syrian government, or Iran said we're supporting the Syrian government against the terrorists, right? And I'm careful, I don't use the term terrorists against all of the armed opposition, because simply I don't believe that is very factual when it comes to all of them, to be fair. Why are they saying still, assuming that there is some sort of understanding happening between them, between Iran and Hezbollah and Russia and Turkey? Why are they saying that, oh no, we support the government? Well, if you're saying you support the government, why aren't you sending people to support the government? What are you waiting for? Bigger cities to fall under their control? And if so, that's going to take you much longer to take back. What sense does it make logistically, militarily? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to allow your opposition, right, or the people who you are calling this massive threat to advance towards Damascus. Well, now, of course, they're in Hama, next is Homs. Once they're in Homs, next step is Damascus. That's it. They took down the government, literally, if that happens. How comes they are allowed to go so rapidly? And what sense does it make to allow them to go so rapidly without having some sort of a confrontation? Is it to delay recapturing those cities and locations? It doesn't make sense. Why? Because it's going to take much more resources. If there is an attack coming and you see it as an attack or as a threat, right? Then, well, you face it from the beginning. Well, what are you waiting for? Are you waiting for them to reach Damascus? And Hama, by the way, talking about Hama, you're almost talking about the northeastern part of Lebanon, the Lebanese borders. Okay? And that's something major. It's not as if it's something easy, right? Okay. And let me, I just wanted to share the map here with you. Just 1 second. Okay. If we, let's have a look. If we talk about Hama, then we are talking about one step before Homs. If we talk about one step before Homs, then we are talking about a massive threat to Lebanon or Hezbollah. That's assuming they are still viewing this as a threat, right? So let's look here. That's Syria. That's Syria for you. The armed opposition, they were based primarily in the Idlib province. Idlib province is in this location here. Then they went to control Aleppo. Aleppo, as if nothing happened, to Hama. Look at how much, talk about hundreds of kilometers all the way to Hama. Over 100 kilometers. Hama to Homs, that's approximately 40 kilometers, roughly. That's nothing major. If they are in Homs, well, that's Latakia. Latakia is government controlled. And again, you know, the government locations are losing territories very quickly, but they would be able to have a look here in Lebanon, in North Lebanon, right? And then go down to Damascus. That's it, Hama, Damascus, you know? And that's a matter of 8 days only. Meaning, well, if Iran and Hezbollah are worried about these groups cutting their supply to Lebanon, then either they are totally inactive, right, to levels that are, you know, unimaginable based on their moves in recent months, or they have a deal. They have a deal with the opposition groups that, look, fine, we know Assad was about to fall at one point, so long as our interests in specifically when it comes to the ongoing attacks or our conditions to continue to supply to Lebanon are not affected, we wouldn't have a problem. I mean, this is what I'm trying to understand here. It appears to be that way. Especially seeing as we're having more concerns coming from Israel about the progress of the armed Syrian opposition. How? Well, first they started to call them terrorists. Israel's starting to call the armed opposition in Syria terrorists now. There was an emergency meeting between Israel Katz, for the defense minister now, and the chief of staff. We have more statements coming from figures inside of Israel saying that we prefer Assad because he's a weak leader who we know. He's a weak enemy who we know, and we don't know this opposition. We don't know what they're going to do. And I wanted to share with you some of what has been published inside of Israel in that regard. This is the meeting. That's the first thing that I wanted to share with you. The meeting between Israel Katz and the IDF chief of staff. Against the backdrop or amidst the deterioration in Syria, Katz and the chief of staff held a situation assessment, and that's something that is not very normal. You know, it's an abnormal assessment that they're meeting this control. But this report said, with the first attack in Syria tonight since the start of the renewed uprising and the rebels taking control of the city of Hama, Defense Minister Katz held a special situation assessment on the issue. Defense Minister Israel Katz and Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi are currently conducting a situation assessment amid the worsening situation in Syria and the continued advance of jihadist rebels into the heart of the country. A few hours ago, the Syrian rebels succeeded in capturing another major city in northern Syria, Hama. One of the 5 largest cities in the country fell into their hands. And Assad forces were forced to retreat from the city in disgrace. In Israel, with concerns about the increased chaos from the north and heightened alert, the Chief of Staff and Minister of Defense held a special situation assessment of the General Staff Forum regarding the developments in Syria. The IDF stated that events in Syria are under constant monitoring for the security forces and that the IDF is currently preparing for any scenario in attack and defense. The IDF spokesperson stated that the IDF will not allow a threat near the Syrian-Israeli border and will act to thwart any threat to the citizens of the State of Israel. That was the first thing coming from Israel. Secondly, we had Tamir Yadai, who is a senior figure in the Israeli army, saying that the situation in Syria is worrying us a lot. I'm going to translate it here from Arabic. The situation in Syria is worrying us a lot. And if the Syrian opposition defeats the Assad government, then we can see them in future on our borders, and we need to be prepared to take that threat down. So, more worried tones from Israel. Emergency meeting, IDF worry, and also senior, genocide supporters showing worry too. And one of these people, he's called Eliyahu Yossian, right? Eliyahu Yossian is a man who is a blatant genocide supporter. He actually supports increasing the genocide inside of Gaza. And he's an analyst inside of Israel. And he had this interview. He had an interview during which he stated this.
חלק השני, האם אנחנו יכולים לשחק במגרש הסורי לטובת אינטרסים שלנו, והאינטרס המובהק שלנו לחסום את העברת האמל"ח של המשטר האיראני לחזבאללה דרך סוריה. אם אנחנו יכולים להשיג את המטרה הזאת, אז אהלן וסהלן. מה שכן גם בצד עוד זווית נוספת, פוטין ככל הנראה לא ייתן יד להפלת משטר אסד.
נכון.
בסופו של דבר אסד הוא בן ברית שלו. לכן הסיפור הוא הרבה יותר מורכב. נכון מאוד, לכן סוריה בהנהגת אסד זה מגרש אינטרסים של ישראל, טורקיה, רוסיה ואיראן, שכל אחד מושך לכיוון שלו. אחד, אני אישי בעד קיומו של אסד, כי הוא אויב חלש, ואויב חלש משרת את האינטרסים שלי. אף אחד לא מבטיח לאחרי נפילת אסד מי יגיע. יכול להיות אויב יותר סורר מהמשטר האיראני. מי יכול להבטיח לי? עכשיו אני יודע, יש לי אסד חלש, שכל שני וחמישי אני יכול לתקוף את סוריה, בתיאום מול רוסיה, וללא שום איום. אז אחד, אליהו יוסיאן במצב הנוכחי, בעד קיומו של אסד. שתיים, אני חושב בתוך הסיפור הזה של מורדים, אנחנו צריכים לשמור על אינטרסים שלנו ולדאוג לדבר אחד ויחיד, לחסום את הצירים הראשי של העברת האמל"ח של המשטר האיראני מסוריה ללבנון. אם אנחנו יכולים להשיג את המטרה הזאת, זאת אומרת אפשר להגיד טיפלנו במידה רבה באיום שקוראים לזה חזבאללה, וגם להשאיר את אסד כאויב חלש, כי יש לנו יד פתוחה
Okay, so that was another statement coming from the Israeli side regarding this situation. More worry, emergency meetings, an unclear position from Assad's allies, Assad's traditional allies, or to be more specific, a lack of decisive action. And if Syria has traditionally been a pillar when it comes to the supply and support of the resistance fronts, then are they, what are they doing exactly? Again, you know, why are they lax? You can't be lax about that. Either it's a grave mistake strategically, if he is indeed still protecting, or there has been an understanding with the opposition, and the opposition of today is not the opposition of 9 years ago. That might be it. Another thing, and again, there has been a report, and mind you, Saudi backed, so traditionally, although Saudi Arabia again condemned this progress this time against Assad, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, there was a report in a newspaper tied with Saudi Arabia saying that Al-Assad asked Israel for help, and Israel responded that they demand the expelling of Iran from Syria for them to help him. Now, mind you, again, one website, no more sources for this. Okay, but we had this report a few days ago in Elaf saying that Bashar al-Assad asked Israel for help, conditional on expelling Iran from Syria. In a remarkable development, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad requested assistance from Israel to confront the Syrian opposition. Security official told Elaf that the message reached an Israeli security agency through one of Bashar's most powerful aides in Europe. The official noted that Israel responded by saying that it was not concerned with what was happening in Syria and requested that Iran, its militias, leave Syria before requesting assistance from Israel. If that has been the case, if that has indeed been the case, was Iran aware of it? And therefore they're not helping al-Assad. Because they said, we're not going to help you. Them and Hezbollah. Potentially Russia as well. Question. The second thing is, well, another report that we had about, let me share it with you in a sec. A publication, right, based on a report coming from Israeli newspaper Haaretz. It was published in one of the Arab websites, actually going to an Arab TV, Al Arabi, it's called, saying messages to Assad via Russia. Newspaper reveals Israel's fears of opposition progress. A report by the Hebrew newspaper Eyes revealed Israeli concerns about the possibility of the Syrian regime's chemical or advanced weapons reaching the Syrian opposition's factions, which could lead to serious security threats on its borders. Israel conveyed messages to Bashar al-Assad via Russia, demanding that he insists on his sovereignty and prevent Iranian activities within Syrian territory. The report quoted Israeli officials as fearing that Assad would be unable to confront the control of Syrian opposition forces over areas near the border with Israel. The Israeli army believes that if these weapons reach in the hands of the Syrian opposition's factions, Tel Aviv would be forced to take preventative measures that would affect the entire Middle East. The entire Middle East. Since November 27th, the Syrian opposition's factions have been engaged in clashes with the regime forces in several areas after launching the Deterrence of Aggression operation. The opposition factions stand their control over Aleppo and the entire Idlib province after taking control of many sites, including Ma'arat al-Nu'man, Khan Sheikhun. Okay, now they have Hama as well. Again, is the Syrian opposition, that's the question here. And again, I told you from the beginning, if you're looking for conclusions, I'm not giving you conclusions, I'm giving you probably more questions. Is the Syrian opposition, or has the Syrian opposition been in contact with Iran and the axis of resistance and given them reassurance that in case of control, there wouldn't be any sort of effect on the supply line to Lebanon and Iran's interest in the region, and of course reassuring Russia too, because none of that can happen without this but primarily Iran and Lebanon, by the way. Primarily Russia, there has to be some sort of involvement, but primarily Iran and Lebanon. Have they done that? Or are we waiting for what? The armed opposition to reach Damascus? Because again, like I said before, the armed opposition of today, we're not in 2015. 2015, we still had ISIS, completely out of control, 100% backed by foreign intelligence agencies and what have you. And we had infighting between al-Nusra and ISIS and other opposition and ISIS, and were some coordinations here and there. Everything was messed up. Now, is there something different that hasn't been there before? And is there an understanding between them that's leading to this whole situation? Because we can't just simply explain this as a further expansion coming from the opposition, right? And every single supporter or ally of the Assad government for his own purposes sitting there not doing nothing. How can you allow that to happen? How can you allow that to happen when you've spent so much time? Now, some people are arguing that, well, it's due to Hezbollah retreating, for example, and going to fight Israel. Hezbollah weren't in all of these areas. They were in very limited locations. That's number one. Secondly, if Hezbollah had to retreat and go to fight Israel, then other movements can come in. Why is Iraq not sending people to help Bashar al-Assad? Why is the Iraqi government also saying, well, we're not going to intervene? Why hasn't Iran taken the decisive action? And like I said, from this opposition figure, Al-Humsi, who had an interview before, he said we didn't have a lot of confrontations with the Iranian-backed armed groups inside of Syria. What does that tell you? Well, that Iran doesn't want to support. Why? Why? Are you not worried about anything? So more questions than answers. More questions than answers in Syria. But again, like I said, I'm monitoring all of that. I'm sharing my questions really with you and what I'm reading. And we'll hopefully continue to monitor the situation closely, because again, it's developing, and it's developing rapidly every single day. And the Assad forces are getting a blow after blow. The tone of the armed opposition is changing, and Assad's traditional allies, it's as if, nothing very serious is happening. Despite the statements, because listen, sometimes you need to look at on the ground what's happening and put the statements on the side for a bit. Even if you're saying I support and this and the general rhetoric and all of them are terrorists and this and that, look at what's happening. Look at what's happening. So with all of this development, like I said, more questions than answers. And it would be interesting to see where things go after the opposition forces reach Homs. Homs, you're talking about the biggest province. If they control the city of Homs, that's a further 2.5 million approximately Syrians in Homs. And like the biggest province, and then it would only be Damascus. And if they go to Damascus, there is no indication that the forces belonging to Bashar al-Assad will stop them, and that would be without any participation from the traditional allies of the Assad government, who supported him for a very long time for their own reasons, and again, assuming that they might have had some understanding with the opposition and their advancement that is becoming more and more rapid by the day. And these were the main things that I want to share with you in this live stream. And I'll open the space up for you for your participation. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in for another show. And let's see where we are. If anyone sent any questions before, you might as well send them now, because I'm not going to be able to go back that far up. Glenn Huxley, Marcel Ploger, and Alexander G, thank you so much. Let's see. Kirk, CJ Walton reported that Hamas supports the Syrian rebels. Are any thoughts on that? Well, Hamas was initially expelled from Syria in 2012 after they refused to blatantly support the Syrian government. And despite the fact that they released a statement at the time, Khalid Mish'al and his office in Syria, they released a statement saying that they support both the independence of Syria's government, but also the people's aspirations for democracy. It's not as if they only stood by the people against Assad, against him. So they tried to kind of say that we support people's right for democracy, but we also support Syria being a stable place. But that wasn't enough for Assad, so he expelled them. There were tensions and there were statements from multiple leaders from Hamas during that period, supportive of the revolution in Syria and against the Assad government, although the Assad government, again, housed them and helped them. So they had frictions. In 2022, there was a reconciliation process between Hamas and the Assad government, alongside the reconciliation process that was happening between the armed opposition groups and also Bashar al-Assad. After Astana, 2 years after Astana, and Khalil al-Hayya, who's the acting political bureau head of Hamas, he met with Bashar al-Assad himself. There were photos of both of them together just a couple of years ago. So there were figures who said, yeah, we oppose the government, and there were others who were like, no, not necessarily, because they helped us and what have you. Because again, you've had split opinions internally about the matter and how exactly it should be resolved, even with traditional allies of the Assad government. That's why there's a split in Iraq and there's a split in Lebanon, right? But again, you can't conclude that no, all of them support them. No, that's not correct entirely. And again, from the perspective of Hamas as a movement, for example, they have an interest that Hezbollah would be strong. Well, Hezbollah participated the day after, and who was channeling all of that? Assad and his government, or allowing that to happen, right? So yeah, it's a complex situation. There have been indeed figures who supported blatantly, but now, by the way, there have been some figures reported to be Hamas leaders or what have you, saying all sorts of stuff. That's not true, because some of them are not in actual leadership positions, by the way. Okay. Ramplans, I heard the Syrian army was protecting the entrance of Hama, but the rebels took it. Also that the Iraqi army was coming to help us. I don't see them anywhere. What the heck is going on? The Syrian army was protecting, trying to protect the northern, one of the northern parts of Hama from the armed opposition coming in. And the Syrian media declared that no, our forces are having heroic battles, and then later the opposition stormed through, and they are in Hama, in key locations in Hama, and again, without no problem, not many people fleeing or anything of the sort, no panic. They're trying to reassure people. Okay, and like I said, the next step is Homs. And with regards to not the Iraqi army never said that they will go. It was some of the armed groups inside of Iraq, popular mobilization forces, and even them. One of their leaders said that we can't go to Syria unless we are approved by the Interior Ministry, and the Interior Ministry hasn't approved that. And there have been statements from Iraq to say that, oh no, we don't want to intervene in that. And then Al-Julani himself, who's heading this armed opposition, said that, I've heard your statement and I think that's good. Like you did not intervene necessarily between Iran and its confrontation in the region in a signal of Iran's intervention or attack on Israel, as in you haven't participated in it directly. We hope you do not participate in the case of Syria. We hope you don't participate in the case of Syria. That was Al-Julani, who is leading this opposition, telling the Iraqi official who said that, we might not actually, we're not necessarily going to intervene in what's happening in Syria. Something's happening. Something's happening in the background, and it's raising more questions than answers. And like I said, all we can do is try and analyze and read what's happening, because you really can't be conclusive. And like I said, we're talking about, I mean, the last massive escalations we had were after the Russian intervention, really. Before that, you were talking about everything was all over the place, and ISIS was taking over parts of Iraq and Syria, and we all know who ISIS were. But then things changed, de-escalation, reconciliation, and now we have this, a change of tone, lack of, well, decisive support coming from Assad's traditional ally. Have things changed? Have things changed? Or, you know, is there a deal? Is there a deal that, you know, no, is being hidden from us? We can only deal with what's being reported. It looks like there might be something, unless that is, all of a sudden, we're going to see this massive push and support for Assad. And, you know, they start defeating the armed opposition. But what military sense does that make? What strategic sense does that make? If you are indeed worried about these people and you haven't had any understandings with them before, and you still consider them the same thing that they, or that some of them were 9 years ago or whatever, would you allow all of that and give up all of your accomplishments? That is massive territory in Syria. Now, like I said, they control the majority of the Syrian population is under their control. And guess what? They're there, the Syrian population. No mass exoduses, no nothing. But as a matter of fact, there were images of some people reuniting who were opposing Assad. So there is indeed something that hasn't been very clear yet. Isn't the cutting of the supplies to Lebanon a stated objective of the rebels? That's from Jouino. Not from the official objectives that they declared openly. What they declared is that we are about to liberate Syria. Of course, there have been statements from some in the rebel groups against Iran and Hezbollah and Russia because of their participation in protection of the Assad government previously. But again, if Lebanon, if Hezbollah and Iran are worried about the supply line to Hezbollah, and the rebels are indeed looking to end it, then would they allow that to happen? That's the question. Or is there an understanding that we don't know of? And that was from Ramp Lens. TMZBGT, that's an interesting question. Does HTS have the capacity to hold these cities long term? If so, where are they getting all of these resources from? What has Russia done so far, and what they're planning to do? Well, previously there was control, but again, the developments in Syria have been rapid. So we can't even compare now with the previous battles of 2015 and 16 and what have you. Now the armed opposition, they're fighting the Assad forces with drones and whatnot and more advanced weaponry. And a lot of this is coming from Turkey, who has its own plans and aspirations. And, you know, the other day we were talking about some of their political figures talking about Aleppo as if it's like part of Turkey and what have you. Can they hold these cities long term? We don't know. All we know is that they're storming through. Before, when there was a counteroffensive, well, they lost to Assad's allies. So now the argument is, if we're only confronting Assad, we will win. so long as no one supports him. The bigger question is why are his allies not supporting him? Is there something? And is there truth to his actual calls with Israel, al-Assad? Is that substantiated? Is there an understanding between the opposition and Iran and Hezbollah too in Syria? Again, you can hear their statements. They're still saying we support the government and we support this and that. Well, what are you doing then? What are you doing? And no one can argue that like they can't send forces or whatever. That's not true. And again, why is Iraq the country that can send forces directly to Syria? Why are they not sending anyone? And again, by the way, it's important to know that Iran, Turkey, and Russia, they will have summits soon. There are other meetings as well between countries in the region in the next coming days, trying to reach a solution to the situation in Syria. Okay, let's take the last one or two questions. Antithesis ME has shown Syrian rebels dropping a Palestinian flag together with the Syrian opposition flag over a building. What's your take on this, Mahmoud? I saw that video. The argument of the people who took it down is that it was the flag of the Ba'ath party, the Ba'ath party that belongs to Assad, because it has a Palestine flag on it. You know, not that convincing, but like I said, there are elements in the opposition that there are question marks around, and it's not as if, you know, we're trying to portray one side as a saint here, right? We're trying to read through. On the other hand, there was the Palestine flag raised over the citadel. So the opposition also raised the Palestine flag over the citadel, alongside with the flag that they consider to be the flag of the revolution. And there are many people in the opposition in the Syrian opposition who constantly participate in everything pro-Palestine. That's something undeniable. So these could be certain elements. And there are certain elements who have done things that cannot be condoned in the Syrian opposition. It's undeniable. And likewise, there have been crimes committed by Assad and the people who are with him. These things cannot be denied. You can't like conclude or show a side as if there are absolute saints. That's not true. And some people, of course, will be upset by these statements. And I totally understand these people, because, you know, the situation is divisive. And some people would only want to say, oh, yeah, no, that's it. And the other side is, they're all that. No, I don't agree with that necessarily. And I'm sure some people would disagree with me on that. And that's totally fine. And what we're trying to understand here is, of course, what is actually happening, both from what is being public, what is being made public, and what is being made, or what is being done in the background. From the past 8 days, right? It appears to be that there are more things happening in the background than what's happening on the ground and public on the news, right? And I think the most important thing before taking a necessarily a position, because don't forget, you don't really have to take a decisive position on anything on earth, by the way, and no one's forcing you to. You're entitled to, of course. Anyone can take the decision or position they like. Everyone is free to do that, but you don't really have to if something is not very clear enough. And we're talking about something that has been developing for a very long time. Not everything on either side can be bought and claimed as 100% correct. I don't agree with that. But what we're trying to do is make sense of what's happening and analyze it based on the evidence that's coming from both sides, putting aside the propaganda and interest, by the way, because I'm not a fan of propaganda and interest, and all of that side is hell and all of this side is angels. That isn't the case, especially in Syria. And we'll wrap it up there. And again, I'm sorry if I left you with more questions than answers, just sharing my views here. But thank you so much for tuning in. Again, hopefully I'll have a video for you after this, and tomorrow with another live stream. In the meantime, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for HS, Marvin, Samba, Alexander, Marcel, and Glenn. Thank you all for your supers. In the meantime, everyone stay blessed, take care, and I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone.